Hey, Anthropology 1001. This is my first video vlog, my first vlog. I'm teaching an anthropological analysis class on YouTube and Black Girls, and so I have to do a weekly vlog, and I want to try and do two a week, one for each class, and so this is my first one. Dr. Gaunt here, coming to you to talk to you about this week's chapter in the Mirror for Humanity Kotak book. It is the emphasis in this week's chapter and discussion had a lot to do with one of the objectives from the course. I review my syllabus because I too forget, remember, forget, remember, forget. That's what we do, cycling life, remember, forget. And the second outcome that I promised for the course is that you'll learn a method of inquiring into, participating in, and studying culture with a scientific method known as ethnography. Remember ethnography? The definition I want you to memorize is the first-hand personal study of a local setting and to understand each element of that very simple definition. And you'll also learn to discover your own ethnocentrism. You can learn to put aside the limits of your own cultural lenses and gain insight into becoming a cultural anthropologist in your own life and or in your occupation or career, okay? So I want to talk about a couple things. I'm going to talk about four things. I want to talk about an error that I made in the work action tracker. Thank you, Linda, from the 410 section for pulling this to my attention. I want to talk about language relative to the Richard Borshay-Lee feedback I gave you on your papers. And I want to tell you a couple stories. I also want to answer a question again here on the video about how do you find credible sources, which came up in the 410 section, which is a great, great question. Thank you, Michael. Okay? So, and then I'll wrap up. And so I'm going to try and do this in... let's see, I think I'm already at 2 minutes. Is that true? So it'll be 5 minutes, okay? So the work action tracker, I don't have it in front of me, but if you go on the Blackboard account, under notes and handouts, you'll find a copy of the work action tracker that has been updated. What Linda brought to my attention was that there were 2 weeks that actually overlapped, November 11th and November 5th. So I had to collapse the weeks. The last 4 weeks were out of sync. So I've updated the new version on Google Docs. So if you go, you can actually download an Excel version of it and see the new version under Notes and Blackboard. I'm sorry, Notes and Handouts. It doesn't really affect anything except you need to either change in your work action tracker the dates that are now listed online under the Blackboard link to the Excel sheet, or actually download the Excel sheet and use that to track all your information, and then print out what you need whenever you lose it. You shouldn't lose that sheet. Don't lose that sheet, okay? I'm going to collect those on Wednesday, so please, every Wednesday I'm going to collect them. I still have to figure out a method to make sure that you drop them off so that I can look at them, and I'll give them back to you, okay? Often I can do that in class, but I'll probably have to do it over a weekend the first time. So the next week we're going to start talking about language, and as I kind of discussed when I gave the feedback on the Richard Borshay-Lee, there is... language plays a really big role in how we do the cultural translation work that we do between the emic local beliefs and perceptions that we're trying to collect and represent in our written product called an ethnography, and what the etic observations of a scientist are. And we're always biased by our own cultural upbringing, our Western thinking, our U.S. domestic thinking, my thinking as a Black woman, that always codes how I understand things. So it's funny that when I offered a general critique without pointing to anybody, that the use of the word denigrate in the Richard Borshay-Lee article, Eating Christmas in Kalahari, was not the most... I signaled that WC was applied to it in a few papers, and several people used it, not just one. But you should find this fascinating because, of course, something happened after class that enlightened me. A student who had written denigrate in their paper came to see me. And I'm going to tell you what they said to me without exposing their identity. So let me do it this way. Let me tell you the definition of denigrate, which I find fascinating. This is from the Oxford Dictionary, one of the most trusted dictionaries online. You always want to go for the best work you can find, the best website you can find, top brand. Don't go for Walmart. Go for, what's the best store? I'm not a shopper. You know what I mean. Go for the best high quality website you can find by the best authorities. So the word denigrate in the Oxford Dictionary is a verb. It's usually accompanied with an object, and it means to criticize unfairly or disparage. For example, there is a tendency to disparage the poor. So it's interesting that Richard Borchely-Lee's situation where he bought the ox for the home of the Kalahari for their big Christmas annual feast where people from all different tribes come together and celebrate and dance all night and eat the fat. It's interesting that the word denigrate came up. The definition has its origins, the word denigrate has its origins in late Middle English in the sense of blacken, make dark, from the Latin denigrate, denigrat, or denigratus. It's also from French, meaning blackened, from the verb denigrare, or from de, which is away or completely, and nigrare, which is from Niger, or black. Interesting for me, of course, as an African-American woman, because I always notice in the 15 years I've been teaching, when people read about Africa in any context, these kinds of things come up, which talks about the way sociolinguistics might look at language. Language uses us. We don't use language. So it's not uncommon for a word that, and I wasn't thinking about this when I was offering the critique of the use of the word, that I thought the word choice was poor, because the Hung were actually, in the 410 section, someone said, actually initiating Richard Borchely into the customs, the ways, the normal way of living, thinking, believing, and behaving in the tribe. When someone is expressing something that is akin to arrogance, what we call arrogance, members of this egalitarian community often do things to what we might consider as belittling or denigrating. But it's interesting that that word comes from to darken, or to disparage, or to criticize unfairly. That's how Richard Borchely, as the outsider to the native beliefs, the native local beliefs and perceptions, felt the experience. But we ethnographers have to put aside our feelings and actually figure out what is the norm that's going on. So I want to leave you with a very interesting thing, 2 insights. The student who came to see me is a non-native speaker, and they shared feelings that they themselves felt denigrated because I brought that up in front of the class. They were one of the few. There were about 3 or 4 people who used the term. And what I observed in her from an ethnographic perspective is that the student was adapting to not only American English, but to a kind of directness. This is where her local beliefs and perceptions, they were adapting to a kind of directness in the U.S. educational environment in the classroom at Baruch, where everything's very direct, as opposed to the place where she was raised in Europe, where poetic and metaphorical language was used in classroom inquiry. And it's been very difficult for her to make that negotiation. So what's customary and native to her ways of thinking, feeling, believing, and behaving is to talk in metaphorical and poetic ways about what's happening with human beings and people. In the business kind of culture of Baruch, which is spread throughout all, even the liberal arts, where we're very direct and formal and you've got to have the right answers, this has been occurring as a real culture shock for her. So it's a great, great, fascinating phenomenon. So, and the other thing I was going to say is that the ethnocentrism that comes up is not intentional. So when we talk about ethnocentrism, like a lot of people in their papers had things that were ethnocentric that I can see, but they themselves don't notice. Like saying that for the question, the cultural values and behaviors of the Kung clash with the anthropologists. Their answers, some of them said that the Kung viewed the anthropologists as a rich onta or whitey, and that language is very common perhaps in our local and native beliefs and perceptions. And it may have been there. Another said that the Kung did not view individual wealth as important as collective wealth. That was accurate. Okay, we're going to start over. This has now gone too long. Yep.